On this show, I've talked about Israel and Palestine as it relates to war, peace, and human rights. And because I've covered the issue in a way that rivals the mainstream media, I've been viscerally attacked for it by the Israeli lobby, the media, and by Netanyahu's very own spokesperson. All of this for simply providing the other side of the story, something that my next guest has now committed his life to. And it's extremely significant considering he's the son of a decorated general from the Israeli Defense Forces. He was drawn to peace activism in 1997, primarily in the aftermath of a suicide bombing which tragically took the life of his niece. So, to talk about his personal journey and to help me break through some of the biggest misconceptions about the conflict, I spoke with Miko Peled, peace activist and author of The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I first asked him about the myths perpetuated regarding the formation of the Israeli state. Take a look.
The three myths that I usually refer to, the first one is the myth of the creation of the State of Israel, which is, the myth is that after the United Nations passed the resolution to partition Palestine, that the Palestinians did not accept this resolution and then began a massive attack to destroy the small Jewish community that was living there at the time. And then miraculously, within a year, the State of Israel was created and the small Jewish state prevailed and so forth. But then when you look at the details, you see that the Jewish community at the time, which was a small group of immigrants, really less than 500,000 immigrants that were living there at the time, were suddenly given by the United Nations the lion's share of the country, and the Palestinians, who were the vast majority in Palestine at the time, were deprived of more than half of their land, which was absurd. And then you look further and you see that the Jewish community had a massive militia of almost 40,000 armed men, of which my father was an officer, and there was no equivalent on the Palestinian side. There was no fighting force on the Palestinian side. And then once again, you keep looking further and you see that as soon as this resolution was accepted, the Israeli forces began a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing. It was probably one of the worst acts of terror that has taken place in that part of the world in a very long time, where for an entire year, the Zionist forces engaged in a massive campaign of brutal ethnic cleansing. So that's the first myth that I talk about. The second myth is the myth of 1967, that once again Israel was faced with an impending attack and had to engage in a preemptive strike. Well, my father was a general at the time. As I was working on the book, I went into the Israeli archives, the Israeli Army archives, and I looked at the transcripts of the generals' meetings prior to that war, and it's absolutely clear that the generals are all saying, well, there is no threat at all. In fact, we have an opportunity because the Arabs are not prepared for war. And therefore, we have an opportunity to strike, destroy the Arab armies and take more land. So that, again, that is one of those myths that, that was perpetuated, that the war of 1967 was a preemptive strike, but it was not a war of choice. There was an existential threat. And once again, you look at the details and you see that there was no threat at all. The generals were talking about an opportunity. And the third myth that I talk about is that Israel is somehow a democracy, which is, I think, the most laughable myth of all. Israel today rules the entire country, all of Palestine or all of Israel, depending on how you call it. Half the population, about 6 million or 6.5 million people, are Israelis. The other half, close to 5.5 million, are Palestinians. And Israel governs the Israelis and Palestinians under different laws. Right. So you have the laws that govern people like myself, Israeli Jews, who really live quite in a democracy, free to come and go as they please. Then you have the laws that govern the Palestinians, about 1.5 million of them who are Israeli citizens, racist laws, over 30 laws in the law books that discriminate against them specifically, and they live in an entire environment of racism and discrimination. And then you have
Miko, I just wanted to jump in there. Yeah, we really do hear that Israel's the greatest democracy in the Middle East. That's a really, really important point. I wanted to move on though because we have a lot to go over. I wanted to play you something that Glenn Beck said. I know that he's fringe, but I think that what he's going to say right here really exemplifies what a lot of people think in this country when they want to criticize Israeli government's policies, but they're scared of being labeled an anti-Semite. Let's check it out.
We all know, in the quiet of our own souls, exactly what's going on here. It has nothing to do with embargoes or borders or anything else that can be solved. It's because Israel exists, and it's a Jewish state. Let's be honest with ourselves. There are some people who just can't get past that. It's the world's oldest hatred, anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, it is alive and well in our time.
So there's Glenn Beck, just in regards to the most recent conflict with the Gaza and Israel, pretty much saying that it's because it's a Jewish state. I mean, it seems like right now in the discourse, political discourse, there's no distinction between Judaism, Zionism. How did it become in this country that if you simply voice dissent against the Israeli government, that it's an attack on the Jewish people?
Well, because there's a hysteria here. There's AIPAC and all these other pro-Zionist or Zionist organizations in the U.S. that create hysteria. But, you know, it's funny when he says the problem, in a way, he's right. The problem is the Jewish state. The problem is that if you're going to have a Jewish state in an Arab country, which is what Palestine is, where half the population is not Jewish, you have to have a racist state with racist laws and, you know, hold thousands of political prisoners and deny half the population their rights. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a Jewish state. So in a way, Glenn Beck is right when he says that. The problem is that this is a Jewish state, and that's why the solution has to be, you know, similar like as in South Africa, where they had to get rid of apartheid. In this case, they're going to have to get rid of Zionism and allow for a real democracy. The problem is precisely the Jewish state, but there is a differentiation and a distinction between what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be Zionist and what it means to be an Israeli. You know, being Zionist means you agree or you think that there should be a Jewish state in Palestine. So that means you agree that there should be a racist state with thousands of political prisoners who deny half the population its rights and its freedoms. So if that's what people think and that's what people, you know, it's a values issue. It's not politics anymore. I happen to disagree. And then there are many Jews around the world who always have opposed the notion of a Jewish state because it was racist and either were indifferent or in opposition to it. The reality is that most Jewish people don't live there, never will live there. And even, you know, after the state was created, and this was several years after the Holocaust, most Jewish people preferred not to go there, not to live there. So, you know, equating Israel with all of Judaism is of course another one of those myths. And if criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, then I would ask, well, what is it when you support a state that is a racist state? What does it say about you if you support a state that holds thousands and thousands of political prisoners only because they're Palestinians? Not, you know, most of them have not engaged in violence. What does it mean about you when you support a state that intentionally drops bombs and kills children in Gaza, knowing full well that they're going to kill innocent civilians, including children? So I think it's important to set the record straight on this issue. If opposing this is anti-Semitism, then what do you call it when you support this monstrosity?
Excellently put. Wow, Miko, that was great. And you know, I can't just help but think, you know, the victimization of Israel and also just it being a Jewish state and then using that to victimize a whole nother population. It's just mind-blowing to me. I wanted to get into Netanyahu. I mean, here he is. He's an extreme right-winger, the right to the right. He is one of the first leaders that completely rejects a two-state solution. It looks like he's going to win again in January. I mean, what does that say about the mindset of Israelis right now? Do a lot of people agree with you? Do a lot of Israelis even go into the Palestinian territories at all?
No, the country is completely segregated. Most Israelis wouldn't venture either because they don't care or because they're afraid. And that is a very sad state of affairs. That's a success of the segregation. I think Bibi Netanyahu is really the direct. I don't think he's any different than any other prime minister that Israel has ever had. I mean, other prime ministers pretended that they wanted peace. He doesn't even pretend that he wants peace.
Right.
But in terms of what they did on the ground and their relation to the oppression of the Palestinians and the brutality towards Palestinians, Bibi is no worse or better than any other Israeli prime minister. All the Zionist governments have been the same, and you know, we can't forget that the ethnic cleansing that began in 1948, which was probably the most brutal act of terrorism against the Palestinians, was conducted while, you know, the governing body, so to speak, was kind of a labor, which is a little more supposedly more liberal. So in this regard, there's no difference if Bibi Netanyahu gets elected or anybody else gets elected in terms of the relations with the Palestinians and the brutality and the ongoing the ongoing brutality against the Palestinians is not going to make any difference at all, whether he's elected or somebody else.
And really quickly to wrap it up, we have about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you about Palestine having the non-member status granted recently. We've heard high-level officials in the Israeli government spewing very hateful rhetoric about, in retaliation, you know, they want to bomb Gaza back to the Dark Ages, completely level Hamas. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I know that you advocate just completely tearing down the wall and having it open. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility. I think it's a realistic possibility, and I think it's going to take place. I think Israel is on the defensive here. They're going to bomb Gaza, and they're going to just try to destroy the Palestinians either way. I think the vote was a positive step. I think any recognition of Palestinian rights is a positive step, is a good thing. I hope that it will lead to some actions against Israeli politicians and Israeli generals in the International Criminal Court for their crimes against the Palestinians, because this is one advantage of this recognition. And I hope to quickly see an end to this crazy notion of a Jewish state, which has become such a liability for everybody, for Israelis and for Palestinians in the Middle East.
Well, thank you so much for opening up that dialogue. I think it's one that is crucial, completely not had in this country, and it really needs to be, especially when we support Israel's actions with so much of our taxpayer dollars every year. Miko Peled, peace activist and author of The General's Son, thank you so much for coming on and for your time.
Thank you.
The other side of the story, something that my next guest has now committed his life to. And it's extremely significant considering he is the son of a decorated general from the Israeli Defense Forces. He was drawn to peace activism in 1997, primarily in the aftermath of a suicide bombing which tragically took the life of his niece. So, to talk about his personal journey and to help me break through some of the biggest misconceptions about the conflict, I spoke with Miko Peled, peace activist and author of The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine.
Passed a resolution to partition Palestine that the Palestinians did not accept this resolution, and then began a massive attack to destroy the small Jewish community that was living there at the time. And then miraculously, within a year, the state of Israel.
I first asked him about the myths perpetuated regarding the formation of the Israeli state. Take a look.
The three myths that I usually refer to, the first one is the myth of the creation of the state of Israel, which is, the myth is that after the United Nations
on this show, I've talked about Israel and Palestine as it relates to war, peace, and human rights. And because I've covered the issue in a way that rivals the mainstream media, I've been viscerally attacked for it by the Israeli lobby, the media, and by Netanyahu's very own spokesperson. All of this for simply providing